So we've been gradually, building these shows. We started in January, not too sure where we were heading with it, but it's really taken on a life of its own. And now every month it becomes, like, what are we talking about? And I think this month, the topic of intellectual rights and intellectual property, well, IP as they call it, in the jargon, is so important because, of course, this is the value. I mean, if you are creative, what is it? What is your value? Your value is your intellectual property. And actually, I looked up the definition of the word, and it's a work or invention that is a result of creativity. It's so vague, such as a manuscript or design to which one has rights and for which one may apply for patent, copyright, trademark, etc. So, but IP really touches, as we know, all aspects of creative content. And I think we're now really understanding and learning the value in the Caribbean. Actually, when we were chatting, I was wondering, well, when did we really first realize how important IP or creative content was, or to have it registered? And I was asking Erica, she thought it was maybe when, the Andrews sisters took one of the Calypso songs and made a huge hit without properly securing the rights to that. Maybe that could have started an understanding of what this is worth. And fortunately, and now we are looking, and there's a drive amongst the banking institutions in the Caribbean to start to use IP as a collateral. And what does that mean? That means that you can use your IP to secure loans and to back investments. So, intellectual property rights are really the rights given to persons over the creations from their minds. So it's so vague. And this is where I hope our specialists this evening will be able to drill down a little bit and explain more about that. What I gathered when doing a little online research, that it covers patents, trademarks, copyright, and trade secrets. And I like that, trade secrets, because we actually have a company in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, who has a trade secret. That is Angostura bitters. Think about it. This product is found in every bar in every country in the world, and yet do these people know it comes from Trinidad? Most of the time, not. So it's like, how can we use this intellectual property, these intellectual property rights, to get more recognition from the countries that they come from? So I think it's about time to talk to our specialists and find out more, because I have many questions myself, and I have been in the industry for a while. So we have two very versed guests this evening, two great women. I love when our guests are women, of course, and representing Caribbean islands of Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados. So joining us first, we're going to have Dr. Erica K. Smith, and she has been an intellectual property strategy and management specialist for over 20 years. So, talk about experience. And her doctoral research focused on the management of copyright in the digital environment, which of course is so current right now, because with the appearance now of this NFTs and and all the digital platforms and the streaming and so on, it really is where creative talent and creative expression is heading. So great for that specialization. Erica also has an LLM in intellectual property law and in intellectual property law and management. So her work is focused on all sectors, including the creative industries, providing advisory services to MSMEs on optimizing innovative activities and the identification, management, and monetization of their intellectual property rights. Wow, that is an important job. And on an institutional and national level, she develops IP policies and strategies to support economic and financial development. Erica, welcome to the C15 Show. So happy to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's jump straight in it. Like, what is intellect management? What is it? What is your job? Tell us a little more.
All right. So I have two jobs, let's say. My day job, I manage the organization, which would be the sister to COT in Trinidad. I manage that in Barbados, Cost Cap. But then I have this consultancy, Intellect Management Services, which is a firm that really looks at all aspects of IP management and strategy. So, as you mentioned in your introduction, looking at essentially business development in all sectors. So the approach I take is to ensure that IP considerations are made from the time you conceptualize your business plan through to execution. Because normally people will have IP as a separate or afterthought. So I really try to include it as part of your overall business strategy.
Yeah, and it is so important, as we're realizing, with the new thrust that how can you try to develop or even get investment for a project if you don't own or control the intellectual property, because that is at the end of the day what you're selling. So what would be like 3 core pieces of advice that you'd like to share with Caribbean creatives in terms of, the law, IP business and so on?
The first thing I would say is you should always seek to be as original as possible. There's no IP in copies. So you want to be able to secure intellectual property rights because they offer you exclusivity. With exclusivity, you can create space in the market. It keeps competitors off, and it allows you the time to develop the product, develop your brand, and to exploit it commercially. So think and be as original as possible. Integrate IP into your business activities. Understand that you should consider it in your business plan, your business strategy, etc. And I would say you should always document. We don't like formality. Yes, you need to be a bit more formal in your approach, but at the very least, you should document what you're doing. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And, it reminds me of a conversation I had where, they're saying the best investment that you can do for your business, is in that legal framework, making sure you're properly set up in terms of your brand and, registering your IP and so on. So don't ever think, oh, it's going to be too expensive, because it will come back to bite you afterwards. Because if you have to do it after the fact, or especially if once the business has started to take off, or what if you want to bring in an investor? That's the first thing the investor is going to ask for. And I think that is so important. So I'm seeing some questions coming in. We'll take the questions and answers after the 2 interviews, but keep the questions coming in because we will come to them. So that is great. Thank you for that. So what are the specific advisory services that you provide for creatives in your under Intellect Management?
Okay, so yes, I have the degrees in intellectual property law and management, but my first degrees are in business management and international business. So like I was saying, I take a very business perspective to IP practice. I see it first and foremost as a commercial subject. So my job is to ensure that you are able to develop your business, maximize profits, solidify your position in the market using IP as a business tool. So I will help you to identify the IP you have. I will help you to understand how to design your business plan to maximize the use of IP, and help you to figure out a commercialization or monetization plan for your IP rights. So how to make money from it, which is usually the issue.
Yeah, exactly. And because we just don't have proper institutions set up for those kind of things, but we are getting there. I don't know if you're aware, but there's a lot of money that is, for example, sitting in organizations in the United States, like in the music business, royalty collections that can't be distributed because, the people aren't registered or don't have the proper system set up. So I think organizations like you and individuals like you are so important. As I wouldn't stress enough, as somebody who has been, developing projects and creative industries, to really make sure that your IP is properly managed and registered, and that you understand, how to monetize it and how to work with it. So,
Well, I would say, Lorraine, that also what you are doing and other entities that are offering support from the financial perspective is also very important, because there are a lot of creatives out there who need the financing and investment to help take them to the next step. So it is to help them understand that they have these assets, and that these assets can be monetized to help not only with allowing them to protect against infringers, which is how people think of IP, but also to allow them access to use it as collateral, etc. So all of that would be where I position myself in terms of services.
excellent, and that is so valuable. And where can we find you? We will share. We can share your website in the chat. But so that's basically, if people wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way?
You can use the contact form or email me at info@i-manageintellect.com. Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Erica. That is great, and I'm happy to have met you. I mean, we've been on a webinar before, so I think this is good. We're going to be working together closely, because I think it's really important. And for us at C15 Studios, one of the things that's key is also knowing that whoever we are supporting financially has their IP properly organized and so on, because obviously we cannot invest in a company or person who doesn't own their IP, who has problems representing the IP that they are trying to get investment for, so big role, and I'm sure we're going to do a lot of work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Lorraine.
So let us bring on now our next guest, Terita Kalloo from Terita Kalloo Law. So Terita is an attorney at law, specializing in the field of intellectual property and entertainment law. She's a national scholar of Trinidad and Tobago. She studied law at the University of the West Indies, where she obtained a Bachelor of Law with honors, and she also attended the Hugh Wooding Law School, where she obtained her legal certificate and also graduated on the principal role of honor. She's worked at the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs and at the Intellectual Property Office of Trinidad and Tobago as legal counsel before entering private practice. So she obviously wanted to do her own thing. She's a go-getter. She's currently runs a boutique intellectual property law practice, Terita Kalloo Law. And as part of her law practice, Terita actually hosts an online pro bono IP clinic. And she's offered one of our guests this evening a free hour one-on-one with her to talk about your intellectual property and to see how better to manage. What really excited me about Terita is that she's recently launched an IP management company focused on providing IP management services to strategically protect and monetize IP assets. And this platform provides an online marketplace where IP can be sold, licensed, or funded. This is really taking it now into a whole other realm, but this is where we want to go. So really excited to have Terita on board with us. We actually at C15 Studios, we've joined forces where Terita will be working closely with us and bringing her services to our clients and helping us build out this area of IP and IP management and understanding the value of it. So Terita, you are super woman, super lawyer. Why would you go in this direction? Why did you choose this area of law?
Thank you, Lorraine. Yes, so I have a passion for law, but I also have a passion for the creative sector. And the beauty of intellectual property law is that it's a merge of law and business. And it deals solely with, innovation and creativity. And that really struck me when I began working at the Intellectual Property Office. And the more you learn about intellectual property rights and the, expansive benefits that it has for businesses, I could have clearly seen how it can be used as a very strategic tool to help our Caribbean nations develop, and not just develop, but to have sustainable development. So I really got a keen interest in this field. And so I immediately started, focusing my practice solely on that particular field.
So could you explain a little bit to our viewers, what are the differentiation, trademarks, copyright, patents, trade secrets? What are all these different terms? Just, we're not going in depth, but maybe just, guide a little bit and explain what the different terms are.
So intellectual property, as you would have said earlier, is the express creations of the mind. And it seems a bit complicated when you hear all these different terms, but it's actually all around us every single day. And each different type of intellectual property right protects a different aspect of a product or a service, essentially. So we'll start with the one that's the most relevant to the creative field. I would say it would be copyright. And this is a right that exists automatically. It's a right that protects any sort of musical, literary, or artistic works. So, for example, films, music, and fashion, all of these things fall under copyright protection. And each type of right has its own length of protection, and it's protected in different ways. So as copyright is an automatic right, you have industrial property rights that you have to take steps to protect. So you have trademarks, which is another very relevant type of intellectual property right for creatives. And I'm sure we all are very familiar with trademarks. It's what drives our decision. It could be a name, it could be a slogan, and it's anything that you use as a badge of origin for your goods and services, essentially. And what is so fantastic about trademarks is that because competition has developed so much worldwide, businesses now have to find new ways to distinguish themselves. So we are now living in a world where you have non-traditional trademarks, where companies are using a sound, for example. If you think of Marshall's Hey Ha, for example, that could be a trademark, and it's a sound mark, and it distinguishes his songs from other songs. Immediately when you hear it, you know who's singing on that track. And so that's essentially what a trademark is. It's meant to give you a monopolistic right for a particular name or symbol or whatever it is you create once it's original and it's distinctive. And another type of intellectual property right we hear about often, but it's not a right that is widely used within the Caribbean, would be patents. And patents deal with innovation. So anything that is new and that solves some sort of technical problem and that is not obvious to the field. So that's when we're talking about inventions, for example. If you come up with a new way of doing something, a new method of doing something, that could be protected by a patent. And when it's protected, you can stop other persons essentially from using that particular method you have created. Or if you create a new drug, a lot has been said about the COVID-19 vaccines, for example.
Yes.
And that it has really come to the spotlight. And so and you see the issues that arise, you know, where countries don't have access to it. And so it's a very important right, and it's a very important aspect that could really help the Caribbean as well. And we need a little bit more development in that area. And there are many different types of right, but the last one I will really stress on for the creative sector would be industrial design rights. And so this protects the ornamental aspect of a particular product. So if you think, for example, of like the Burberry plaid, you know, like that's distinctive. When you see it, you know it's Burberry. And so it protects that sort of what makes your product aesthetically pleasing. And we all know if you go to a store and you see a perfume in a beautiful, you know, very unique bottle compared to one in a generic square bottle, for example, you're going to choose the very fanciful one. And that is what industrial design is meant to protect. If you created something very unique and aesthetically pleasing, you can get protection and exclusive rights where you and you alone can use a particular design for a specific period of time.
Okay, that was so useful. And of course, I've been thinking of examples as you've been talking. I saw early on Nalini Akal was on, and she's a dancer. So I'm wondering, can you copyright a dance, a choreography, for example?
Yes, you definitely can get copyright rights to choreography. So if you come up with a unique choreography, and for example, and how it works practically, if you someone wants to use that particular choreography, or they want to record you and use it for production, for example, you have rights to that choreography, and you are entitled to decide whether persons are allowed to use it. You can decide whether persons are allowed to change your particular choreography and adapt it in a particular way. So that is protected by copyright for sure.
That's very, very interesting. So, I mean, you kind of said it there, but how can people financially, creatives benefit financially from these intellectual property rights?
So there are many ways you could benefit financially. So firstly, the traditional way that persons use and benefit from intellectual property rights would be to use it within their own businesses. So if you create a new trademark, for example, and you employ a lot of marketing and branding behind it, and you create goodwill behind that particular trademark, it allows you, in some instances, to charge a price premium, or it can allow you a greater market share because of your use of it and whatever goodwill you have behind it. And that's why persons will choose your product over another product. And that's you protecting what you create and using it to help your particular business financially. Another way you can financially benefit is by directly leveraging your intellectual property. So if you create the same business, you have this great trademark, it's well known not just in Trinidad and Tobago, it's well known in the Caribbean as a whole, and you want to expand into a different market, but you don't necessarily want to operate in another market. You can create a franchise, for example, and what you're essentially exporting is no raw materials, no goods. You're exporting the use of that particular trademark. If, for example, it's a fashion company and you have your designs protected by industrial designs, you could license the use of that design by other designers in the region where they are manufacturing, they are producing, and all you're doing is licensing use of that particular right, and you receive royalties directly for use of that particular intellectual property right.
Yeah. And I mean, I actually was very involved in the music business, and I have a publishing company. And, you know, we collect rights. So I had a music label called Rituals Music, and we still collect publishing. I mean, this is like 20 years later, and we're still collecting publishing rights of music that's being played or used. You know, so it's what I wanted to, using that example, to say that there's no time frame. It's almost like this is a legacy. This is something you're investing in for your children. Well, look at Bob Marley's estate, you know, for example.
Exactly.
You know. So it has huge, huge value. So I think it's definitely something not to play with. I think Caribbean creatives need to be more aware and to take it more seriously. And that's why I really wanted you and Erica on this evening to show that this is your career. Like, you all are making a career out of this. So we need to, take advantage of having people like you all and what you all are offering to make sure that our IP is well represented. What factors would you say? So, I mean, talk a little bit about the situation that we're in, like in the Caribbean right now, in terms of, IP management and so on. I mean, yes, we have Erica in Barbados, but how do you feel across the region? Do you feel supported in what you're doing?
I would say I feel very supported, definitely. I think first and foremost, for intellectual property rights to exist, you need to have proper legal systems, you have to have proper laws. And that is something that is common throughout the Caribbean region, while some jurisdictions like Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago may be a little more advanced in terms of the types of laws that they have put into force. All of these islands have the proper intellectual property laws to protect these rights. So we have that. We also have a lot of great intellectual property experts, and not just in one particular field. We have IP experts that come from the legal field, from the business field, from the creative field as well. And so the support is there, the expertise is there. And I think that is really important. What I think we really can use, however, as a region is definitely intellectual property education, because I think it has a tendency to sound a bit complicated, and persons tend to shy away from it, or they think of intellectual property as something that big companies deal with. That's for Apple, or that's for Google to deal with. When in reality, it's such a powerful tool that individuals, SMEs can use to actually help them to expand quicker and to increase their revenue stream. So I think IP education, first and foremost. And I think we definitely need to cooperate more as a region to try and allow persons to not just create these things that are protected by intellectual property rights and keep it within that particular country, but to expand further throughout the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. And this is essentially what is the idea behind the same IP Harvester marketplace that you were talking about. I think we definitely need a marketplace, just like we have marketplaces for physical goods where you can go and you can buy a dress online, or you can go buy a dress in a store. I think we definitely need to have this intellectual property marketplace where you can go on, you can see what persons have to offer. You can offer your services in a more visual manner where persons, it brings a lot more visibility to intellectual property rights. And I think that in itself will increase the use and the monetization of intellectual property rights. And, naturally that will spur on further use of it, and further value will be added to intellectual property rights in the Caribbean. Excellent. So a lot of different things.
Yeah, well, no, important things. So Harvester is basically the platform that your marketplace that Terita is setting up, where we will be able to trade. You'll be able to sign up for services of, people like Erica. You'll be able to register your IP. So it's really going to be a one-stop shop that I'm really looking forward to seeing it, come to fruition. And I know Terita has been really working hard on this, as well as her master's in Strasbourg. She's like super busy. And so let's, we have quite a few interesting questions coming in. Thanks for sharing the harvester.com there, so you all have that. And what would, well, you can answer that. So the next steps, and we kind of went through it, like what should we be doing? And that's where you said it there, where you think that the Caribbean creatives need to start, and Erica said it too, to start taking this more seriously. So let's actually, do you have anything you want to close with, Erica, before we go to the, not Erica, Terita, sorry, before we go to the questions?
Nothing in particular, but just in terms of a wrap up on my perspective of IP and creatives taking it seriously, I think my advice to the creative sector would be don't shy away from intellectual property rights. It's not as complicated as it may sound, but it's actually a very useful tool. And in terms of practical steps they can take moving forward, would definitely be to just simply start by identifying whether they may have intellectual property rights subsisting. And I can bet you anything that once you are in the creative sector, you have you have certain products or services that would give rise to intellectual property protection. So the first step is just to start identifying it, create a strategy, and decide how it can benefit you, because it's not about just going out there and protecting each and everything that you create. It's about looking at the value of it, identifying how exactly this can help you and your business, and then taking the proper steps to protect it and implementing it into your business strategies to ensure that you properly leverage it and get the worth that it has in it to your business.
Yeah, and that is really super important. And I think, you can't stress it enough. And so I'm going to jump into the questions here. And Vidya had sent a question for Erica asking, do you mean document my process as an artist? When you were talking about, documentation.
Right. I don't know what field the person is in. You should document, especially when you're speaking about copyright, and having evidence and being able to show that you did in fact create the work. But as you document, you also have to bear in mind, depending on what you're doing, that you don't want to necessarily disclose either. Because for some forms of IP rights, disclosure can destroy one of the requirements for registration.
Oh.
So, yeah, I don't know we have time to go through the different forms, but what I would say is you should always document and keep the documentation in a safe place. And just to be sure, do not disclose, especially when you're talking about processes.
Right. So so for example, a painter or a potter or something, so they could actually film their process or take photos of it, or like that.
So that would be mainly copyright for the fields you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And the thing about copyright is that it is, unlike other forms of IP, you do not have to register for copyright to subsist. Copyright, and depending on the local legislation, but generally copyright subsists once the work is original and has been fixed, or let's say recorded in in some forms. Because you're not registering for protection, keeping things that you're working drafts and dating them become important if you need to later prove that the work is in fact yours. So that's what I meant in terms of documentation.
Okay, very, very important. Thank you for that. So we have an interesting question here. Cecile is asking, if you wish to turn a carnival character into an NFT, who owns the right to the NFT? So for example, a midnight robber, does anybody own the right to a carnival character, Terita?
So this is a very tricky question. And I actually was just looking at a very great article from the World Intellectual Property Organization on this issue, because we're seeing NFTs coming to the forefront now. And there are questions in terms of ownership, because when you purchase an NFT, you are basically purchasing this code, you know, that they, whenever they would have created the NFT with. And so there's actually a legal debate at the moment as to whether what you're purchasing is copyright protected. So, or is it that you're purchasing the copyright, or is it that you're purchasing the NFT? And we have instances where persons have been going into the public domain and taking particular works that are not protected, and they've been converting it into NFTs and auctioning it off. And then you have the instances where they're actually taking copyright protected works and converting it into an NFT and auctioning it off. The jury is still out on the legal ramifications of this because it's such a new topic. Courts are only now even starting to recognize the validity and the law, the legal standing, or the NFTs being legal property. So we have a recent decision in the UK. Singapore also has a recent decision on it. And so it's actually, so I can't answer definitively, but definitely when it comes to NFTs, you have to consider copyright rights and trademark rights. If you're converting something that may be protected as a trademark into an NFT, you may be infringing if you don't have permission. And if you are trying to digitize a work that is copyright protected as an NFT, you also may be infringing. It's just that we don't have the actual cases to support that particular type of law at the moment, but it is quickly developing.
Right. But I thought one of the things, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Erica.
What I would say though is, in Trinidad, you do have protection for works of mass. I don't have the legislation in front of me, but your legislation read how a specific character is expressed, speaks to how ownership is determined for a work of mass. So
because I'm wondering, because I thought with the NFTs that there's like a chain, like in this blockchain thing. So like the costume designer, the performer, the photographer, the minter, everybody could get a percentage of the value of the
yeah,
copyright.
but consider what Terita said. So there's copyright in the work, or there's a right specifically in Trinidad in the work of mass. When the NFT is created, that is separate and distinct from the work of mass, and there could be the issue of infringing in terms of reproducing the image, you know, the work. There, under copyright law, the transfer of ownership has to be in writing. So that has, you know, you need to know what was underlying, was there a contract or a document transferring ownership. Is the right in the NFT, as Terita was saying, in the code, which is separate and distinct from the rights in the work of mass, right? Yeah. So there's the NFT itself comprises coding, which can have copyright separate and distinct from the software. So you really need to be clear about, was there a transfer of rights and what rights actually exist in the NFT, which could be separate and distinct. And then, you know, who actually owns the blockchain that the NFT resides on. So right. Yeah.
Erica is very right, because right now what they're finding as a big issue, just as Erica mentioned, with it has to be in writing depending on the legislation. What they're finding to be a big issue is that you're finding persons spending millions of dollars purchasing this NFT, and only realizing afterward that they never purchased the copyright subsisting in it. And so you have this NFT, you own it, no one else can own it unless you transfer it to them. But the proper copyright rights that was subsisting in it was not actually transferred. And so it's a really, really interesting field. I mean, it will be developed and we will have the answers, I think, soon enough, but it's definitely something to be very cognizant of when you're dealing with it and know whether or not there are particular rights subsisting in it.
Okay. So, but would it be reckless to like tell Cecile, for example, go ahead and do it and you'll see what happens since things are still evolving?
Definitely. I wouldn't, but I wouldn't say don't go ahead and do it. I would say just consider all the factors and take it step by step. Is this in the public domain? Are there particular rights to this? Can I monetize this, or would I be infringing?
Right.
And what is it I am creating? And what is it that if I'm licensing it out, what exactly is being licensed out?
Right. So they're asking, so would it make sense to commission it as a work for hire? So for example, to hire a photographer, for example, to take a picture of a midnight robber, you pay everybody and then the rights are theirs. But not really, because photography, they don't get, no, exactly, because that's
the photographer would own it.
Yeah, exactly, the photographer would own it. Exactly.
Yeah, so it's not that you can't do it, it's just that once you take it step by step and you identify, okay, you hire this photographer, who owns it? The photographer owns it. Yeah. So you make sure you have the proper agreement in writing, transferring the said rights, and then you take it the next step further where you now want to digitize it. But then you also have to determine whether the person digitizing it would now own this particular reproduction, or if you have the proper agreements in place. And everything will always go back to ensuring you have the proper agreements in place. Yes. So it's not that you can't do it or that it's ill-advised. You just have to do it in a proper manner.
Right.
But there's a Cecile, sorry, I certainly can't. Everything Terita is saying is fine, read the photo, but I can't answer you clearly because you have in Trinidad this concept of a work of mass. So I would need to look at your legislation, or maybe Terita can.
So yeah, I can speak a bit on work of mass actually. So
for the rights in the work itself,
yeah,
as opposed to the rights in the photo.
So we have a very unique addition to our Copyright Act that speaks to works of mass. What it does not speak to is what is defined as works of mass. So and we of course don't have any local case law to tell us the answer. So there's been a lot of debate, actually heavy debate on what actually would give rise to copyright protection, because of course, if you have a costume with a couple beads on it, that may not necessarily be a work of mass. And the arguments that have been raised with it, amongst the IP specialists locally is that the work of mass is not merely just maybe a costume, unless it possibly a very elaborate costume, like the king and queen of mass, for example. But what is a work of mass is the whole production. So if you think of a Peter Minshall performance, for example, so it's choreography, it's music with the choreography, and it's the costumes and the display of that particular theme or whatever it is that they're going with. And the combination of that is what the experts argue would be a work of mass, because they never defined it. There's been a lot of calls for them to put a definition to it, but that has not happened yet.
Right. Well, and I had so many thoughts on this, but you know, time is running out. It's already 6:45, so we're gonna have to wrap up. Just one more question. So from Mark, after you secure trademark, copyright, patent, etc., what legal remedies are available to the owner if someone uses your material without permission? What court will hear the case, and is it costly, timely?
If it's what, sorry, costly or timely?
Is it costly and timely? Well, yes, it's definitely timely. In the Caribbean, it's timely because we take so long to do everything.
Yeah, so the first and foremost reason persons protect their intellectual property is, of course, to prevent other persons from using it. Each different type of IP gives you different rights. So, for example, for copyright, which will be the most relevant, you have a host of rights. So the right against reproduction, distribution, and all of that. So firstly, once you establish that someone is using your copyright protected work in an infringing manner, meaning it doesn't fall under certain exceptions that you're allowed to use it in, you can bring an action at the High Court in the relevant jurisdiction, and you can claim for damages based on that particular use. I mean, any type of litigation is costly, and any type of litigation is it's very time consuming, and it takes probably on average, I would say 2 to 4 years before you can see finality in the matter. And so there are alternative remedies that you can employ. I mean, negotiation or formal ADR methods, which is alternative dispute resolution methods, where you can possibly have an even quicker, less costly resolution to your matter, and where both parties may actually not have to have less casualties from the particular infringement. So it's definitely something to consider before going directly to litigation. But everything is very case specific, and so it would depend on the pertinent facts of the case in terms of whether you go an ADR route or you go a litigious route. And it's also important to specify that in any sort of agreements you may be getting into where you're dealing with your intellectual property, because that in itself can be a whole other long process. You need to ensure you know what is the method you'll be using if there's a dispute, and what country, for example, if it's cross-border, what country's laws you're using, and what jurisdiction you're using.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we have a quick question about Kariri. Is Kariri useful in assisting the IP industry? Do you work with Kariri, Terita?
I do not work with Kariri, but I am very familiar with a lot of their initiatives. And interestingly enough, some of the Kariri employees are very well trained in intellectual property. They are actual trainers at our National IP Academy. I'm also a trainer there, and we went through some very extensive training. So they are very cognizant of intellectual property issues, and they ensure that they address those issues when they're helping companies to create their business plans. And they also host intellectual property workshops. I think it's on a monthly basis. So I don't work there, so I can't speak exactly what they do, but I would definitely say that they do consider intellectual property and ensure that it's included in the type of work that they do.
Okay, great. How can I access Terita's pro bono IP clinic? How do you do that? Go on your website?
Yes, so the information is on my website, but essentially it's a standard clinic. It's once every month, and it's always on the first Wednesday of the month. It's between the hours of 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. and it's for 30 minutes. So it's a one-on-one session, and you just have to reach out to my office. You can send us an email, and we will get back to you on available time slots. Everything is confidential, and it's a one-on-one session.
Well, actually, that's a great segue into the winner of our one-on-one session with you this evening. And that would be Mr. Roy Simmons. Congratulations. You have won a one-on-one session with Terita Kalloo, and Maria from our back end will contact you to organize and set it up. Congratulations, Roy. Good job.
Congratulations. And I look forward to meeting you.
Yes. I also want to hail out Mrs. Elizabeth Montano and Mr. Stephen Taylor, who joined us, two very close friends of mine, and compatriots in the industry. And of course, Elizabeth Montano, we're all very excited because she is releasing her first book, The King of Soca, in a few weeks. So we're all looking forward to that. Mrs. Elizabeth Montano, congratulations, big deal. And of course, Stephen Taylor is well known in the industry of film, but now he is an entrepreneur, and he has his own brand with his wife called Ream Granola, the best granola in Trinidad and Tobago. I am giving them a unbiased plug. So
Thank you, Lorraine.
thank you.
Appreciate that plug.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I mean, it's a family and it's a community we're creating, and that's why these conversations are so important. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. As I said, this information, this is recorded, so it will be shared on our YouTube page. So please go and subscribe and follow our YouTube page. We are sharing all the content there, and it's great. It'll be cut up in clips, so you don't have to listen to the whole hour. Maria, our specialist, PR and communication specialist, does an amazing job to put all that together for us. So I want to really thank her and thank everybody who joined us. I want to thank also Selwyn Henry, who is in the back end doing all the technical stuff here with me. So thank him for that, and have a great evening. Erica, Terita, thank you so much. I know we're going to do big things together.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoy your evening, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.